might be a beneficial,
Sorry.
no problem. What might be a beneficial conversation is the process for introducing a new status icon, because it sounded like it maybe wasn't the most straightforward thing in the world. I myself wasn't aware of it. It sounded like Jeremy wasn't aware of it as well. So I don't know if that's a worthwhile conversation to have. That might be something that's better served just Dimitri and myself having offline, or we could have it here. If anybody else has anything more exciting, I'd be more than happy to yield my time.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one for alignment. If anyone, if anyone doesn't agree with that, like feel free to drop as well. But I think for myself, that's also interesting for aligning everyone on the same page. It's also pretty a good discussion. So I feel like we could go on. Anyone else has anything to suggest for today?
I'll probably have some stuff for the next one, but not today.
Cool, Mike. Let's go with that. I know that we have been tackling some of these questions already. So curious, how did you proceed? What are the outcomes there? What are the questions?
Sure. So let me give you just a little bit of background on what we're talking about here first. Window. Oh, there it is. So we're talking about pipelines and mostly the kind of status of them. So there's a few views of that. There's this mini stage, or the kind of mini graph view that you get in the pipelines view, but also somewhat similar to what Dimitri talked about last time. When you're in the pipeline view here, really talking about these status icons. So in this particular issue, we are talking about limiting pipeline job concurrency using semaphores, right? That's the kind of thing that just rolls off the tongue. But basically, it's the idea that sometimes you want to have a process where you are only running one job at a time. This could apply to the same job within the same pipeline, but I think it's easier to think about it as if you're running multiple jobs or multiple pipelines that run the same kind of job. There are times when you would not want to run two of those at the same time. So the idea here is to only let one of those run. A great example would be if you have a physical device like an iOS device, you can only run the tests on that at the same time. So thinking about an actual physical device. So this went through a number of iterations, but ultimately landed on defining a resource in your CI YAML. And then that resource in this first iteration will have a concurrency of one, meaning only one of those can be run at the same time. So you can now define that group and you can set it to run. So only that, if that resource is currently being used, then all the other jobs that are trying to use it would be marked as waiting. So there wasn't really much UX to it. It was just the introduction of this one icon here. A new status went with the hourglass. It's a SVG that we already have in the library, just introducing it as a status, and then adding a tooltip here that says waiting for the resource group, which is the keyword that you use in the CI YAML file, and then it tells you what resource group is currently using that. So there's that. That's the background on it. I guess if there are any opinions on, I guess, the introduction of a new status and or the use of the hourglass icon.
So what you've done, Mike, you basically took this hourglass icon. Yeah, and put it in the circle because the circle indicates the status of something, right? Like.
Yeah, so we have a number of, let me pull up the GitLab SVG. If you go to this and type in status, we have these status ones that are specifically, I think, only used in this pipeline view. I'm not sure if they're used anywhere else. But it generally is this circle with the icon in the center of it.
If you want, I can give some additional context around that. So the ones with the circle are older icons than the one without a border. At some point, we chose together with engineering to make those scale a little bit better. That we're going without the circle around it, and create that pod with CSS. I do know there's also a different option there to edit or to style the SVG elements inside the SVG to be dynamic in width and that kind of thing. But it was a decision back then. But there's an issue to clean that up. So eventually there should be only one set of status icons going forward.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Nadia and I were actually talking about that the other day. Does it make sense to carry around, like especially in this case where we have the hour at glass icon and then having a separate one as a status when, yeah, you could just add the circle with CSS. So we are moving in that direction. That sounds good.
So Dimitri, what you just now said, basically that all of the icons with a circle around that should be deprecated soon?
Yeah, I'll link the issue. The issue has been scheduled, but we'll need to, of course, see if it ends up being deliverable. It's been pushed, milestone after milestone. But it is an issue where we, it's basically technical debt that we need to solve and get rid of, one of the icons in the status. We're either gonna keep the one with the border or we're gonna keep the one with the borderless. And I would push for the borderless right now, as that allows us to make the icons that are without a border there, they can be used then in multiple places if need be.
Yeah.
There's some cleanup work to be done, basically.
The feedback that I gave earlier to Mike, that I feel like the ones that have border inside are, especially if they have a smaller size, it's really tough to see what's inside. Like, especially with this hourglass, if you will put it into this border circle, for example, like here, I know that this is not the size, the original size, it's a bit smaller, but it's really hard to see what's in the circle.
Yeah, like this is a good example here.
Yeah.
Once it gets down to that size, it is a little challenging.
Yeah. So, and who is making the decision? Are we going for ones with borders or without?
So that is an issue that belongs to continuous integration. And I've created that original issue. But I believe Jeremy Elder has shown interest in that issue as well. So when we finally get to scheduling it or making it deliverable, we can make the decision right there. But I think borderless should be, or it's most likely going to be, the solution going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's borderless, but when it's showing the pipeline, we are gonna draw the circle with CSS, right?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question about the color. Wouldn't the color be? I'm afraid that like when I see that color, I just assume that it's kind of like a warning, and then like sometimes with our own pipelines, like the ones that we use internally in GitLab, after a while, I ignore them because I know like it's something that has nothing to do with my merge. It's just like something about the pipeline. So I just when I see yellow, I automatically assume that it's, yeah, it has an issue, but it's not my issue, and I'm gonna ignore it because it has, So
yeah, what you're talking about is it is allowed to fail, and then the pipeline did continue or did pass, even though the failure of a single job was
right.
done. I would say it depends, right? Like, are you the target audience to fix that error? Maybe not. Like in that case, like you shouldn't matter to you, right? But for example, if you're the DRI of the development of that merge request, that that error might very much be of interest to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess can I do a mini user test on you? So if this is a status of waiting, meaning it cannot proceed until something else happens, is there a color that would speak to you better?
That's a good question. Let me think about it. Well, I was gonna go with black, but just for a reason. It's because we already, when we have a merge conflict, I'll show you. When we have a merge conflict, we already show like a, where you need to resolve conflicts. That's what we do. Wait, just. Save. Wait, just give me 1 second.
So while you are doing that, do we use yellow color if that means that there is an action needed, or is it a warning color, or?
Let's go to the videotape. Slow loading pajamas today. Yeah, so I mean, that was my debate as well. I could see it being just the gray, no color to it as well. I don't think green or red would be appropriate. It's not a success, and it's definitely not an error. I could see gray being a possibility as well.
Yeah, inside our color documentation on design.gitlab.com, the waiting action has been depicted as belonging to the orange color, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So if you decide to do otherwise, we might need to, review that documentation again, because then we would not be aligned with those guidelines anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I don't recall what the wording was, but I did consider it. When I did this months ago, it did seem like orange was the appropriate color.
And perhaps it's interesting to know that when runners were introduced, CI was introduced, and especially if you're on a self-hosted instance, having no runners available is a much more likely thing to happen. And therefore, having your pipeline be in a pending state, waiting for a runner, for example, is something you want to be, that is a warning state, basically.
I'm sorry, that was me. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Everyone is awake right now for sure.
Shoot.
Or some. I even forgot who was talking with you to this sound. Dimitri, you were saying something, right?
Again, let me see. So I was talking about the orange color being applied to the pending state inside of a pipeline, and that is because if you're on a self-hosted instance, and especially in the beginning of CI, having a runner available for your pipeline is not a natural thing, or might not be a natural thing. So you want to be notified of that, and it's like a warning state. Hey, your pipeline is doing nothing until it's provisioned with GitLab runners. That's why the pending state is orange color, like it's a warning, right?
But so it's actually orange is the color of warning, not the color of waiting. Because in that case, in that particular example, waiting is a warning, kind of like it's not normal. But in general, like I would never associate orange with waiting if that doesn't require any action from me.
It's interesting. It's interesting to look at it like that.
Yeah. So Yeah, like I agree with Juan's question. Like, you know, I'm not sure about the orange if that doesn't really, you know, like request any action.
I just shared on the on Slack because I cannot send images on
Hmm.
It's
uh
at the top of the screen.
Zoom. Yeah, but that when there's a merge conflict, that warning icon is black. I'm not saying that that should be the color. I'm just saying that that's what we do.
Well, actually, in that case, I would expect it to be orange or red because that's a warning. That's kind of like a consistency issue, I think.
Right. So maybe this is where it's wrong. But
So
still,
is
it's
there,
kind of like
yeah.
asking you to take an action, right? Like
No,
solve
it's
this
not.
conflict.
It's not asking you to take an action. It's just indicating that your, I'm going to use the word, progress is impeded at this point. Meaning this will not go forward, because you would expect it to go forward, right? If without this situation occurring, normally the pipeline would have gotten to the point it should normally proceed at this point, but
Got
this
it.
is not proceeding because of a specific situation, which there's no action that needs to be taken. Everything is happening according to plan, but the progress, in my opinion, is impeded at this point.
We might need some like a hierarchy view of colors. Like if this is, you know, if it's more informational than a warning, then perhaps the blue color should be applied instead of the orange one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree to that. At least this is I feel like that's the generic standard accepted. Like the blue is the waiting in progress, whatever. Green is completed, good. Red is warning, aborted, whatever. It's like just general psychology of the colors.
Stepping back from them a little bit, though, I do feel like the user, like when they need to become aware of this, is they're probably in a situation where they're maybe initially confused why this isn't proceeding, right? So something that does draw your attention to it, I think, is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
True.
That could be blue, though. I mean, blue does not really stand out, though, in this context.
Yeah. So I guess we have to judge on the situation, right? If we want to attract users' attention to that, meaning that, hey, you need maybe to have a look into this or double check or whatever, then we may use colors like orange and red. If this is just indicating the progress, hey, you should kind of like just wait, and nothing, you know, there is nothing you can do. You just kind of like need to wait. Then the blue is fine, I think. And well.
Well,
Yeah.
the other interesting thing is that if this is going to be shown in a pipeline, there's a combination of the icon that you're seeing and then the next one. So couldn't we do something in the next one? I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but like, you know, like, because like the next one cannot run because it's waiting on something else. That one kind of have like another status as well, right?
Yeah, so you're saying the one that actually is doing the blocking or has the current one, it is an indication.
Right.
So, yeah, we have a follow-up issue to address that as well, to have it both ways, right? The one that is waiting and one that is causing the wait as well.
Yeah, and that came out of the DAG research too. They want they're using the pipelines and then in this case the DAG to troubleshoot. They don't care what's running fine. That's great. I don't need to focus on that. I want to focus on the things that are not running fine, not on time, failing, and then I want to know more information about those things. So it's great that we've got an issue open to indicate dependent failures, because that was something that came up as well, because it speaks to this whole troubleshooting task.
Nice information, Laurie.
So I think we have, this is an hour meeting, but one thing I did want to get through in this as well, this is great discussion. I'm glad we're having it, but was also hoping to put Dimitri on the spot and explain the process of these status icons, because it seemed to me like there was confusion around it, reading the comments that have been bouncing in this issue. Is there a specific process, and is there something unique about these status icons that is different than the normal icon flow, or am I just reading too much into it?
No, you're kind of right. So I was explaining this to Jeremy as well. I would consider the current status icons as some kind of like a legacy UI element. So when you create a status icon, you're not only creating a status icon, you also need to take care of fav icons. So there's that. In order to create those fav icons, I really need to dive deep into old work in progress sketch documents as to see how I originally created those. It was a less review back then, and because of that, the process to get to the final result is a little bit strange. There was like this situation where we use a 64 by 64 template where we scale down to a 32 by 32, which is created to a favicon, which is also dynamically generated. The whole thing is a little bit it's a little bit undocumented and untouched for a long time because it was deprioritized and other things came up which are more important. Apart from that, I think the additional context I can give is that for example, if you have the check mark icon, right, with the green one, the green circle around it, the icon with the circle around it kind of became like a connection with a CI status. That's also why you see them in the longer badges. For example, on the pipeline list, if you move there, I don't know who is screencasting currently. If you go to the CI/CD pipeline page, then you see here, you even see like in one of those running badges, you see a circle depiction on the left side. Yes, exactly. So it kind of like it states towards the user like, hey, this is a pipeline status icon. The circle kind of unifies the different statuses, but they all matter to some extent and direct to a pipeline. That's why the that icon, whichever one it may be, if it includes the circle around it, can be shown throughout the UI by itself, and you immediately know, hey, this is about a pipeline. And let me see. The last thing around that could be, really thinking hard here. I wanted to say one more thing, but it escapes my brain as we speak about it. Did that answer your question though?
I think so. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we do show the favor. I was curious about the favicon, but it is, I see it now. And now it makes sense to me. Cause when I saw the ones that you had generated, that they were in the lower right-hand corner, which seemed odd that an icon was offset, but it's overlaid with the other one, so.
Exactly. The favicons are dynamically generated. That was, by the way, a community contribution, which I think is pretty great. But then you need to take care of that, right? Like you need to have that context to see is it going to work in the favicon, yes or no? And also, perhaps the last thing, and then I want to remember again, is that when introducing a new status icon, we are expanding the range of statuses that we can show towards the user. I've always tried to be careful with introducing new statuses, because before we know it, we have so many statuses that it's no longer immediately clear to any user, especially beginning users, what is happening, right? And they have to learn additional statuses before they can immediately grasp what's going on from just seeing the icon. So I've been careful with that, but perhaps it's time to introduce a new one. Otherwise, I've been thinking of, for example, using the pending state, but with additional information upon hover. So for example, hey, resources are missing, or we're waiting on the, no runners have been provisioned, or something like that.
Gotcha. So do you feel like this rises to the level, in your opinion, of a new status, or should we trend towards the pending one, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I would say, like, is there enough value in it to immediately know without needing to interact with the status to see that, you know, that this status is different from, you know, a pending status? Because if you look at, for example, pending versus waiting, it's the same thing. Like, pending means waiting, right? But if there's value, like significant value in showing to the user that, you know, waiting on these resources is different from waiting for a runner to be provisioned, and you should always know that immediately, then I would say yes, another status is a good idea. If not, I would disagree with it, and I'd say, like, let's see if we can do the same thing but with the pending status.
Do we ever have a pending? I've always seen pending. I've searched for this before. I've never found a pending. I always see it here. I never see it in a job. Is that even a possibility to have pending in a job?
It should. And I'm unsure why it's not shown there. So it has to do with the hierarchy in which statuses are shown. For example, so if we look at the mini pipeline graph in the middle of the screen, each of those icons represents a stage, right? It does not represent a single job. And so it needs to display like a status that kind of like is the conclusion over all the single jobs within that single stage. There's a hierarchy coded into our system that says, all right, if there is a failed job inside like 20 other jobs that have passed, then we show the stage as failed, because that failed job is much more important than all those jobs that have passed. Like, that is good news. We know that. We don't care about that. Those are good, right? But that single one that has been failed is super, like, that's far more important. And we do the same with overall pipeline status, the ones that you see on the left side. So apparently, those pipelines indicate that it's pending because one of its jobs should be pending. I don't know if that is the case, but if that is not, I would say there's some kind of an error going on.
Gotcha.
Mm.
So I hesitate to say I would defer to you in this, but I feel like you've been a lot closer to this.
I would also say that fresh eyes upon this, problem space is a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, my initial thought was pending felt different than waiting, because pending, I had interpreted that as mostly because I've only seen it in that status where I rarely see it pending in a job, where it felt like it was, something that was upcoming. It was almost scheduled, right? But I know we have scheduled as well, but it felt like, it was something that was upcoming, not it currently should be running, but it is waiting. So to me, that is where the difference was, but I definitely see the argument that pending and waiting are not that far apart, and it is increasing the cognitive load on the user to have to carry those around. So I could easily talk into going back to pending, and it would save a lot of icon work of having to introduce them.
Yeah, that's a very good point, though. Yeah, it's like, I would almost write down what does pending status mean, and then what we intend with waiting in which cases, and then just almost compare that. Maybe discussing that with the PMs, or maybe even with technical writers. I don't know.
I'd be curious to hear Ian and Juan's take on that, now hearing that conversation.
Well, I mean, I think the less we have in terms of like, GitLab is super complex already, so if we can reduce complexity like at that level, I think it's better than introducing more complexity. But I don't know, that's my way of seeing it. I don't know if that makes sense what I said.
I actually had a similar opinion. Like, I would always opt for whatever the simpler solution is. So I don't know. it's hard for me to really tell because I don't know the space well enough if this new status is warranting the full icon and that entire treatment, or if it is easier just to maintain its simplicity with what's already there. So I'm going to totally plug Lori here and say, like, we should do user research to see if, you know, if it's important enough to our users to be able to differentiate the difference. If it's a question that we can't answer, I always put it off on Lori. It's my go-to stance.
That's why I'm here. I can tell you though that anything that we can do for the user to make it easier for them to understand what is going on without having to click into or drill into a job or an artifact or a pipeline, that is what we should be doing. If we can't, then we'll have to force them to hover or click or whatever to go into the failed thing to find out what exactly failed, where it failed, all that jazz. But they're coming here to troubleshoot. They're coming here to check the time to see how long that pipeline went, so they can modify it if they need to. So anything that we can do to surface that information at a higher level so they don't have to click in would be perfect. But again, like I said, if we can't, then make it easy for them to click in and get right to what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think here, like, it's definitely simpler from a engineering, design, all that good stuff standpoint if we just had one single icon. But it would always require then a hover state to understand, wait, is this pending or is this waiting? Because they are two distinct things. I think really would rise and fall on, like, do they care, right? Does a user really care if it's pending or waiting? I think would be the test that I'd like to ask them.
And how are we defining the two? What is a pending thing? What is a waiting thing?
So I can perhaps give you another scenario and ask you what you would do. So if a job fails, so not pending, not waiting, but if it actually fails, we currently expose within the tooltips, for example, if it's a script error, if it's an error because of the runner, if it's some kind of like, I know there's like 5 types of errors that can happen, I believe. And I believe we're adding a 6th. So for these kind of errors, should we show a different icon to immediately notify the user that it's a script error versus a runner error? Or, you know, do we, like, that would introduce 5, 6 different failed icons basically? Or do we have enough with the single failed icon and the user can find out upon further inspection?
That's interesting. So far in talking to people, in the very little stuff I've done around pipeline, like the pipeline page and things, no one's told me that they want more icons. They just want it to be easier to find out what they need to do to fix it. So one of the things, if we're not sure about this, is that we could mock up a page or two to show, like, one page with all the icons and then a page like with other iterations of these ideas, and then maybe our current page, and then have somebody go through a task to say, like, what's going on this page? How would you try to solve this problem? And get them to compare and contrast the idea of different icons. Because my gut tells me the more icons we throw at them, the higher the cognitive load will be for them to try to figure out what's going on. So I don't know, but I don't know. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, perhaps rich tooltips might make sense as well. Like, I
Yes.
know I'm jumping to solutions here, but just a thought.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with that, Dimitri, because what they told me in the DAG research is that their only reason they come to the pipeline, these people who I talk to, typically is to make it better. You know, to make sure that it didn't fail and to fix the things for the next iteration. And if we can make it easier for them to understand what's going on, like with a rich tooltip or something like that, I think that might be more effective than throwing 7 more icons at them that they have to memorize what they mean.
Well, I'll make a slight counter argument to this as well. If we hold that at the highest level, that more icons increases cognitive load, then we should go to 1 icon or IE no icon, right? So taking the limit of it that way, that everything is just an indication of a stage and the tooltip explains what's happening there, right? So obviously that's doesn't make sense, right? I think failed and success definitely warrant different icons. So I think there's definitely a spectrum here, right? The answer isn't one and it isn't infinity. It's some number in the middle. And I think it's always just going to have to be evaluated, like we said, on a case by case basis. There's going to be, you know, things that butt up against each other. Pending and waiting is a great example. And when does those gaps get big enough to warrant another icon, I think is the approach we're going to have to take.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
Having said all that, though, I am trending towards simplicity and MVC, that maybe we just go with the pending icon because it doesn't require the introduction of a new icon. And then we slate this for testing and only introduce the new icon when we can prove that we actually need the new icon. Seems like the GitLab approach. So let me make sure that will fly with engineering, and I will go that way as an MVC, and then we can revisit this. It might make for an interesting study to do both the pending and also, like you were saying, the errors or whatever other ones that maybe we've considered over the years, and do a holistic kind of study on,
Yeah.
you know, are we at the right number or should we increase or decrease?
Or is it even a number? It's more about, are we giving the people the information they need to do their job?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. I love this is why I think these are fantastic meetings, because you would think like, here's an icon and a tooltip, right? Nothing to talk about here. Here we are 41 minutes later, like deep in the weeds. I love it.
Good lesson learned and good discussion. Yeah, I think it's a nice thing for us, for everyone on this meeting to think about in the future. So thanks for bringing that up, Mike.
And Mike, would you mind writing yourself a note or whatever at some point, maybe in January, opening that research request to think deeper into this?
Yes, but I also think this is very close to Dimitri's workflow, so I would
Oh yeah, I don't care. Somebody
be involved as well. That's
yeah. Somebody make this up.
That's my soft punt of the responsibility right there. If you don't speak Mike, that's what Mike is doing there. It's a soft punt.
Well, that was what Lori was doing too, because I'm not going to remember. Somebody else did this for me. But yes, please, anybody, please take the initiative, write up a research issue, tag me in it so I have it on my radar, and I'd love to dive into this. This is fascinating. Maybe we can do a cross stage group conversation too with around icons as well.
Yeah, I'll take up this action point and get it.
Cool. Thanks, Dimitri. All right. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up? Seems like not. All right.
Not yet.
So, was that?
Not yet. Next week, perhaps.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping in at the last point, Mike. Was a nice point for discussion. Thanks everybody for nice arguments, and yeah, chat soon, I guess.
Thanks,
For
everybody.
sure. Bye, guys.